History News, where history is news. Since nothing happens today, we have sent our reporters back in the past to bring you history as it actually happens 40 years ago. This week, the 1970s. The 70s was a decade of clothing people are embarrassed about, music they wish they could forget, scandal, and afros. Tonight, we will be bringing you three of the most important stories from this decade. Let's go now, live to Amelia, the Watergate office complex.
Right now, I'm here at the Watergate office complex. Behind this door are the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee. Right now, there are 5 men trying to plant electronic bugs in their headquarters. These 5 men are believed to be part of the committee of the re-election of the president. Someone's called the police. Here they come now! Can I get a Bernard Baker, can I get a comment? Can I get a comment, please? Hey!
That was Amelia at the Watergate scandal. Accusations have been made that President Nixon was involved. We have the White House on the other line. President Nixon, are you there?
Hello.
Mr. Nixon, are you aware that there was a break-in at the Democratic Convention and 5 men were caught planting bugs?
I'm aware of no such actions.
Indeed. What is your involvement with the organization called the Committee for the Re-election of the President?
I have never heard of any such committee. This conversation is over.
Mr. President, are you still there? Mr. President?
When Nixon won the 1972 election in a landslide, Congress was not ready to drop the charges. Well, the burglars were tried and many of Nixon's closest advisors were indicted, but the president maintained his innocence.
And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes, but in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
President?
Yes.
When Nixon refused to turn over tapes of his private office conversations, the case went to the Supreme Court. It was decided that Nixon had to turn over the tapes to prosecutors. Congress called for his impeachment, but the president resigned rather than face trial. Vice President Gerald Ford became president and pardoned Nixon. The scandal disillusioned people with their government and led to widespread cynicism. In 1976, Ford, who had an unfortunate tendency to fall down stairs on camera, ran against Democrat Jimmy Carter. Carter managed a narrow victory because of his status as a Washington outsider. His presidency is remembered for many negative events, including inflation and energy crisis.
The energy crisis has not yet overwhelmed us, but it will if we do not act quickly. It's a problem that we will not be able to solve in the next few years, and it's likely to get progressively worse through the rest of this century. We must not be selfish or timid if we hope to have a decent world for our children and our grandchildren.
However, the president also mediated peace talks between Israel and Egypt, resumed diplomatic relations with China, pardoned all draft evaders from Vietnam, and attempted to end America's dependence on foreign oil. He also participated in the strategic arms limitation talks with the USSR, which would have decreased both sides' nuclear arsenals. Congress, however, failed to ratify this treaty. Relations with the Soviets suffered again when the USSR invaded Afghanistan in 1979. In 1979, Islamic militants overthrew the US-backed dictator of Iran. Let's go to Audrey in the field for a special report.
I'm in 1979 in Iran, where the reign of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi has been overthrown by Muslim fundamentalists who resent his efforts to secularize and westernize the country. As a result, Iranian oil has stopped flowing into world commerce and shortages have occurred.
I'm here in 1979, where, due to the Muslim militant uprisings in Iran,
Iranian oil has ceased to flow into the market. OPEC has seized control of the petroleum exportations and hiked prices up to record highs. Currently, there are long lines at all the gas stations as people are trying to get gas for their cars.
Thanks, Amelia. Later that year, a mob stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 53 American citizens hostage, demanding the return of the exiled Shah for their release. A rescue attempt in 1980 failed and resulted in the deaths of 8 servicemen and 1 civilian. The hostages would not be released until 1981. In 1980, Carter ran for re-election, but his perceived weakness in foreign and domestic affairs led to an easy victory for his Republican opponent, Ronald Reagan.
In other feminist news, the United States Supreme Court has legalized abortion in Roe v. Wade, and women are celebrating the 50th anniversary of their right to vote.
50 years ago today, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution gave women the right to vote. On this anniversary, a militant minority of women's liberationists was on the streets across the country to demand equal employment for women, care centers for mothers, child abortions for anyone who wants them, and general equality between women and men. Here's how the demonstrations looked, starting with Bob Shackney in New York.
Women's liberation now!
It turned out there really weren't a lot of would-be liberated women willing to stop their work for the day in New York. Early demonstrations tended to be small, and the onlookers were by no means always sympathetic. A few thousand did gather at City Hall to hear and cheer author Betty Friedan, the principal organizer of today's activities.
They're also pushing for equal rights with the Equal Rights Amendment, which has received congressional approval and is awaiting ratification. But Mrs. Phyllis Schlafly has been campaigning across the United States in opposition of this movement. Mrs. Schlafly, can you please explain your rationale in opposing the Equal Rights Amendment?
The Equal Rights Amendment would undermine the American family by violating the right of a wife to be supported by her husband, requiring women to serve in combat, and legalizing homosexual marriages. And its advocates are just bitter women seeking a constitutional cure for their own personal problems.
I understand. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Schlafly.
I'm here in 1978 at the United States Supreme Court, where Alan Bach has just won his case where he sued his university for reverse discrimination. Ever since recently enacted affirmative action, minorities are being represented in higher numbers in business and education. But this is leaving whites feeling as if they have gotten the short end of the stick. This is where Alan Bach comes in. He recently sued University of California, Davis for rejecting his application on the basis that their application process was more favorable toward minorities. Back in the studio, we have Emelyn with an actual phone
Audrey,
interview.
the cops are asking questions about that time machine. We need to go now.
We have Mr. Bach on the other line. Mr. Bach, what made you decide to pursue this case?
Well, I believe that college admissions should be based on merit, not race. Affirmative action has gone beyond fighting discrimination and has become discriminatory itself.
Well, this is a very controversial issue, and we also have Thurgood Marshall on the other line, the only black Supreme Court justice. Mr. Thurgood Marshall, what are your views on this case?
We've worked years to achieve these minor advances in civil rights, and I fear that today's decision may jeopardize everything that we've accomplished.
Understood. Thank you for your time. Back to you, Max.
That concludes tonight's History News. Tune in next week when we examine the advances in 17th century Dutch architecture. Thank you, and good night.